Welcome to The Bitter Witness.
Don't be scared.
Hello, welcome back. I'm Rebecca, and I'm your host for The Bitter Witness. I hope you've had a good week. I'm okay. It's been a good week. Not too much going on around here. It's still stupid cold outside. But hopefully, and according to the Weather Channel, the temperatures are supposed to start going up again soon. But you see, the thing with Canadian weather forecasting is that it's really just a giant shit show. In the winter, they should just say, it's damn cold and it's more than likely gonna snow. Sorry about your luck, fuckers. I mean, what did you expect? You live in Canada. I went to a concert last week and I totally lost my voice from screaming and singing along. It was a tribute band for the Eagles. They call themselves Hotel California, and they were amazing. If you ever see them advertised in your area, go. You will not be disappointed. These guys were fabulous, and they put on a good show, which is really important to me. But yeah, my voice still isn't all the way back yet, so currently I sound like an 80-year-old lounge singer who has been chain smoking for 50 years straight. So bear with me today, and I apologize for the odd voice that you're going to hear through your speakers or headphones. But I do have a cup of tea next to me, so hopefully that will help us get through the episode. Anyway, that's about it from my little corner of Ontario. Let's get the business out of the way, shall we? If you like this episode or any episode, please head on over to the Patreon page and give the show some love. For less than a guitar pick and a pack of strings, you can help me keep bringing you crime cases every week. You can also support the show on Spotify, and don't forget to give the show a 5-star review over on Apple. Apparently it helps the show in the algorithm. Like, follow, and share the show on whatever platform you're listening to. Stop by our Facebook page and leave a comment, or share the post with everyone you know, or don't know for that matter. Everyone is welcome here. That's enough of the business. Let's get to this week's case. The dogs are sleeping behind me, so puppy ASMR will be brought to you by both Miley and Piper this week. So grab a cup of tea, sit back, and relax while I tell you about the disappearance of Monique Daniels. The comforting image of family as a sanctuary, a source of unwavering love and support, shatters when the very bonds meant to protect become instruments of destruction. Family ties, so often lauded as unbreakable, can instead fray and shred, leaving behind a landscape of pain and betrayal. How can one possibly face the world's evils when those same evils are festering within the walls of your own home, perpetrated by the very people who should be your shield? The unthinkable becomes a horrific reality where suspicion replaces trust and the foundation of your world crumbles. When the chilling realization dawns that your parents, those who should be your protectors, might be responsible for the murder and disappearance of your sister, the world shifts on its axis. The safe haven of home becomes a crime scene, filled with the ghosts of what was and the terrifying possibility of what is. To whom do you turn when the very people who should be your confidants are now the source of your deepest fear? The familiar faces that once offered comfort now evoke terror and profound confusion. For Monique Daniels' sister, Angelique, the grieving process became a twisted path haunted by her raw emotion of loss and the chilling dread of the truth. And to this day, she still awaits answers. As always, I want to give the victims in the case top billing. Monique, I acknowledge you and I send my love to you wherever you may be. Monique Daniels is described by her sister as electric, fun, and beautiful. Born on June 16, 1976, her parents are Burton K. Landman and Candace Daniels. Together, the couple also had 3 other children. The family home was not a happy or healthy one by any means. In fact, it was a dark and disturbing home. The children suffered horrific abuse at the hands of their father, who, in 1997, would be convicted of sexual abuse against a 15-year-old girl from his second marriage after Candace. Burton Landmark is currently out on parole for 4 15-year terms that were to run consecutively. When I found out he was on parole, I went to the sex offender registry for South Dakota. And I will tell you right now, he is a shit pig. And he is living right now in South Dakota in a beautiful neighborhood with manicured lawns and children's bikes littering the front yards up and down on either side of his home. I am not going to release his address because I don't want to be the one responsible for some type of karma finding him. But he is out and walking around in a community. So please, if you live in South Dakota, watch your kids. But I am going to post his picture because it is posted on the database along with his address. And you need to know what this shit pig looks like. According to Angelique, Candace also sexually abused the children when she was married to Landman. Candace's role was more directing and instructing the abuse, but it's abuse nonetheless. I couldn't find any arrest records for Candace regarding this specific alleged abuse, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Candace divorced the children's father and later would remarry Charles Daniels, also known as Chuck. Together, Chuck and Candace would welcome a set of twin boys. So all in all, we have 6 children living in the home of Candace and Chuck Daniels, Monique being the oldest of the lot. We also have Angelique, Brian, a boy whose name I could not find anywhere, so we're going to call him Daniel, and the twins, Charles Jr. and Andrew. Chuck and Candace were both in the U.S. military, stationed at Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma City. And the blended family are living in Moore, Oklahoma, which is about a 20-minute drive away from the base. Chuck was a sergeant in the Air Force. Chuck and Candace, both being military personnel, ran a tight, strict, and spotless home. Monique and her siblings were hoping for a better, happier family life when their mother married Chuck, but sadly, that was not meant to be. According to Angelique, Chuck and Candace continually fought with each other, and there was regular physical and emotional abuse towards all of the children by both Chuck and Candace. Monique started to get into some trouble, and this caused rifts between Chuck and herself. You see, Chuck was a very, very strict parent, and Monique was 15 at the time of her disappearance. In fact, she was just 2 weeks shy of her 16th birthday. And she was so excited for that birthday because it meant that she was going to be able to drive and start gaining some of that coveted freedom from her family. We all know what that feels like. The first time you drive away from the house after getting your license, you have this feeling of euphoria come over you as you slip your shades on and crank the radio. Like you could just drive forever alone and happy. I remember that feeling. But now, when I'm alone in the car, the most I think about is, how long do I have to drive with the windows open so that no one will smell the McDonald's I just wolfed down in secret? On June 2nd, 1992, Candace, Angelique, and Brian had gone away on a church choir trip, which left Chuck, Monique, Andrew, Daniel, and Chuck Jr. at the house. According to Angelique, during the church trip, Candace was unusually quiet and sullen, almost like something was wrong. But more than that, Angelique claims that prior to this trip with the choir, Candace had never shown any real interest in the children's hobbies, such as Brian and Angelique's participation in the choir. So the simple fact that Candace had decided to accompany them on this trip was in and of itself strange, to say the least. When Candace and the two kids returned from the trip, Chuck and the kids, minus Monique, came to the church to pick up Candace, Angelique, and Brian. As Candace got in the car, she asked where Monique was. Chuck stated, "She's gone again." To that, Candace stated, "Really?" Angelique heard this exchange between her mom and stepdad and stated that it was odd. There was no emotion, no panic, no worry, just statement of facts that Monique was gone. According to Angelique, that was the end of the discussion as to where Monique could be. When the family returned to the home, Angelique stated that the inside of the house appeared as though a giant frat party had been thrown inside. There were beer cans everywhere, cigarette butts laying around. Some cigarettes had even been squashed out right on the mantel over the fireplace, and the entire house was filthy and upturned. In the bathroom, there was an empty box for a pregnancy test on the counter. The appearance of the house struck Angelique as extremely odd because the house was normally spotless and everything was always in its place. Angelique stated that she immediately knew something was wrong. Chuck and Candace told the children that they thought that Monique had either run away on her own or she was just out with friends partying somewhere, probably drunk. And Angelique thinks that Chuck and Candace were trying to make the kids believe that that's what they believed. Shortly before Monique went missing, she had come home and told her mom and Chuck that she was pregnant. Chuck and Candace went off the rails. They were furious, and they forced Monique to terminate the pregnancy. But Monique had really wanted to keep the baby. This obviously caused a lot of tension and resentment inside the family. And after the termination, Monique had run away from the house for a few days. According to Angelique, when Monique ran away after the forced abortion, both Chuck and Candace were sick with worry about where Monique was. Angelique stated that her parents were out looking for Monique every single day. They contacted everyone and anyone who knew Monique. And if anyone called the house and said that they had seen Monique, Chuck and Candace would drop everything, jump in the car, and try and track her down. Finally, one of Monique's friends had convinced her to return home and try to smooth things out. According to Chuck and Candace, they decided that because Monique had run away before and come home safe, they decided not to file a missing persons report. They figured she would just come back once she had cooled off about whatever it was that she was upset about. I'm sorry, but can we just stop here for a second? If I came home from a trip and one of my kids was missing or had taken off in a rage, I would be hysterical. I would be out looking for them, crying, screaming, and most likely placing the blame on them missing on whoever had been in the house when they left. The last thing I would say to someone who told me my child was missing would be, "Really?" I would be out of my mind with worry, and I'm a criminologist and a weirdo who loves all things true crime, so my mind would go to the most horrible things first. And then I would call the police and report my child as missing, even if the police, or I for that matter, believed that the child was a runaway. At least there would be a report filed, and police would be aware of the report and keep it in the back of their minds as they were out on patrol. At least it would be something. And now I think that both Chuck and Candace are shit snakes. But as time passed and Monique didn't return, Chuck and Candace still never went to the police to report their daughter missing. Quite the opposite, in fact. They began removing Monique from the narrative of their family. They took new family portraits and hung them on the walls of the house and removed the portraits that had Monique in them. Chuck would continually comment to his family that he found it so pleasant and tranquil inside the house now that Monique had left. He would state things like how the house and the family life was just so much better now that Monique was gone. According to Angelique, it seemed as though the life of the Daniels family just went on and never looked back at the fact that one of the children was missing. Angelique stated that at one point she heard Chuck telling Candace that if Monique wanted to be with the family, she would be. So life, at least for Chuck and Candace, seemed to just move on without Monique. It wasn't long after Monique went missing when Chuck and Candace began telling the other children in the house to stop talking about her. Don't even mention her, they said. To Angelique, it just felt as though her parents were wrongly trying to erase Monique's existence completely. To me, I see this as extremely odd behavior. Normally, when a child is missing, no matter how old or young they might be, a family often creates a kind of shrine in the home of that child. Pictures, achievements, favorite toys, etc. They don't remove pictures with the missing from the walls and replace them with new pictures sans the missing child. In fact, normally when a child goes missing, the family will decide to stay in the home that they were living in when the child went missing, just for the slight chance that the child tries to come home. Some will even keep their phone numbers forever, so that if the child tries to call them, the number will still work after years and years. Many families will leave the missing child's bedroom exactly as it was when they disappeared. They also keep their birthday and Christmas presents wrapped in a corner, waiting for them to open up on their return. Not only that, but the missing child will pop up into conversations on the regular. Oh, Monique loved when we did that, or she always laughed at that, didn't she? Hell, my son lives over 8 hours away from me, and he couldn't get home for Christmas this year, and I still have his gifts wrapped and sitting in the living room waiting for when he comes home for his next visit. So, this behavior is very out of the ordinary for the parents of a missing child. In January of 1993, 6 months after Monique had gone missing, Candace's sister, Leslie Westrick, called and asked Candace for the case number of Monique's missing person report with the police. Leslie was concerned that there had been no real movement on the investigation into Monique's disappearance. She decided that she would see if the Center for Missing and Exploited Children would take on Monique's case, maybe get some exposure outside of Oklahoma. But Candace stated to Leslie that she didn't have any number regarding Monique's disappearance. So Leslie, a little confused, called the Moore Police Department herself and asked for an update on the investigation into Monique's case. But the Moore police informed Leslie that Monique had never been reported missing. Leslie called her sister Candace immediately back, asking why hadn't she reported Monique missing to the police? According to Leslie, Candace told her that Monique had run away and there was no need to file a report, and besides, Monique would most likely return after a while. So I guess that Candace and I have different definitions of what the word while means. Because 6 months is way more than a while in my books in the context of a missing child. For me, 15 minutes is a while. 2 days. 2 days. After Leslie had called Candace, the phone rang again inside the Daniels home. This time, Angelique answered. Monique was on the other end of the line. The girls' younger brothers were standing around Angelique, listening to her side of the conversation. Angelique asked Monique how she was doing and made some small pleasantries with her sister, and then hung up the phone. Angelique turned around and told her brothers that Monique was fine, and that was the end of it, which seemed really suspicious to me. If one of my boys was missing and they called the house after 6 months of no word from them, I know for a fact that whoever answered the phone would be screaming for the entire family to come to the phone, and that it was our missing family member on the phone. It wouldn't be small talk or asking how they were. It would be utter chaos. I myself would be crying and screaming, asking where they were and if they were okay and who took them. But not in the Daniels house. Do you smell that? That smells like horse shit right there. 1 week after the phone call from Monique, a letter arrived at the Daniels house. It was from Monique. The letter was postmarked from Dallas, Texas. In the letter, Monique stated that she and her new husband lived in Alaska, but at the moment, she and her husband were traveling around the United States for work. Monique stated that she decided that while she was in Dallas, she thought she would write a letter to the family. Just to let you know, Dallas is almost 200 miles away from Moore, Oklahoma. So it's not like she drove past the family house and thought of her family. She also told her family in the letter that she was fine and that she and her husband had a daughter named Chelsea. Well, isn't that convenient that a letter comes right after the phone call? And why would she think to mail a letter to her family while she was in Dallas and not up in Alaska? So she only thought of her family? The one she ran away from while she was in Dallas and not Alaska? Right. Candace called Leslie to read her the letter and tell her that Monique was fine. But Leslie didn't believe that Monique had called the house or sent a letter. Leslie felt like things just weren't adding up. For one thing, why didn't Monique leave any contact information during the phone call or in the letter, even for Angelique to get in touch with her? So let's look at this. It's awfully convenient that as soon as Leslie starts asking her sister about Monique, that out of the blue, after 6 months of silence, Monique not only calls the house, but also sends a letter, both telling the family that she's fine and just living the dream. I'm getting wafts of horse shit with that glass of crap that Candace is serving up to Leslie. How about you? 9 months later, in September, another letter from Monique arrived at the Daniels house. Again, saying how great her life with her husband and baby was up in Alaska. Again, Candace called her sister Leslie to relay the information from Monique's second letter. But even with the second letter, Leslie was still not buying it. Because, like the first letter, this one was also postmarked from Dallas. So Leslie contacted the Moore police again and told them of her suspicions and requested that they perform a handwriting analysis on the letters that were supposedly from Monique against her sister Candace's handwriting and some samples of Monique's handwriting. Leslie stated in an interview that she thought that the handwriting in the letters looked way more like her sister's writing than Monique's. Police approached Candace and asked if she would be willing to turn over the Monique letters for a handwriting analysis, and Candace agreed. But then, the day before Candace was supposed to deliver the letters to the police station, you're never going to believe this. The Daniels home was burglarized. Upon investigation, there were a few things out of place. Furniture was knocked over or moved. There were some CDs and ghetto blasters that had been taken. And the letters were gone. Really? Really? I'm surprised they didn't say it was Monique who broke into the house. I mean, who else would even know about the letters or even remotely want them? At this point, Leslie is absolutely convinced that something has happened to Monique, and she is pretty sure that her own sister either had something to do with it or knows what happened. I feel so bad for Leslie at this point in the investigation. Can you imagine coming to the conclusion that your own sibling has done something horrible to their own child? It must have made her sick. It would make me sick to think that one of my brothers would intentionally hurt or kill their own child. And now we get to January of 1994. Monique has been missing for over a year now, and Angelique runs away. She heads to her Aunt Leslie's house in Michigan. Angelique stated in a Reddit post that she didn't run away because of the abuse inside her home. She says she would have stayed and taken all of it, but she knew that she needed to get help for not only herself and her brothers, but for Monique as well. And strangely enough, this time, Chuck and Candace went directly to the police station and filed a missing persons report on Angelique right away. They didn't wait at all. And while they were at the police station, and just for shits and giggles, they decided, we might as well file a missing persons report for Monique, too. Once Angelique arrived safely to Leslie's home in Michigan, she told Leslie everything and included in her tales of horrific abuse at the hands of Chuck and Candace the fact that she, Angelique, had written the letters from Monique and faked the phone call for her brothers. According to Angelique, Chuck had forced Angelique to stage a fake phone call from Monique for her brothers and to write the letters to the house and sign them as Monique. In fact, Chuck had not only taken Angelique to the store to pick out the stationery for the letters, but he had also driven Angelique to Dallas to mail them. Angelique told Leslie that Chuck had told her to write the letters and fake the phone call because Candace was upset that Monique had run away. So upset that Candace was actually suicidal. And if Angelique really loved her mother, she would help Chuck to fake that Monique was alive and well, which would only make her mom feel better. Oh, and of course, Chuck told Angelique that if she told anyone about their little secret plan, they would both be arrested and go to jail. According to Angelique, at first she thought that Chuck had sent Monique away because he, meaning Chuck, used to threaten all the kids all the time and say things like, "I have places for kids like you, like a strict military school or boarding school somewhere in Switzerland." Remember, at the time of Monique's disappearance, Angelique is like 11 or 12. But then, because of her aunt's reaction to the truth, Angelique started to realize that something really bad had happened to Monique. Angelique called the police in Moore, Oklahoma, and told them everything that happened inside the Daniel family home. After that, she went to CPS and told them about all the abuse she had suffered and what she thought had happened to Monique. Chuck and Candace were charged with child endangerment, neglect, and abuse. They pled no contest to all of the charges. Shit snakes, both of them. Once Chuck and Candace found out where Angelique was up in Michigan with Leslie, they went to the police and wanted Angelique to be brought back to Oklahoma immediately. But Leslie fought that. And when a judge looked at the documentation from Angelique and Leslie, they refused to order Angelique home because of a concrete fear for her safety. Police interrogated Chuck, and it was during this interrogation that Chuck admitted to everything that Angelique had claimed. The writing of the letters, the fake phone call, telling her that Candace was suicidal. The level of manipulation from this bastard. Oh my God. Police even dug up the backyard of the Daniels home because of suspicion and some rumors that were floating around town. They were hoping to find some trace of Monique, but unfortunately there was no sign that anything had ever been buried in the backyard. Soon after they entered their plea, Chuck and Candace and the boys moved to Germany. Chuck had received a transfer from the Air Force. They left the States for 10 years, and they took the 4 boys with them. But one of Angelique's brothers, Andrew, ran away from home and tried to get to Leslie's to stay with Angelique so that he wouldn't have to go to Germany. But he was sent back home to Chuck and Candace and unfortunately had to go to Germany with the family. And herein lies my huge issue with CPS or Children's Aid or whatever child protection agency we're dealing with. If a judge won't send one child back to the home, why the fuck would anyone else send another one back? And can we just acknowledge the fact that with Andrew running away, that would make 3 out of the 6 children who were trying to get away from that family? I don't know. Why don't we take a second and investigate something? Dickheads, all of them. Later, Andrew would back up all of Angelique's claims of abuse within the family home at the hands of Chuck and Candace. But then, Andrew had another story to tell. He stated that on June 2nd, 1992, the day that Monique disappeared, Chuck and Monique were arguing really bad that day, and that as soon as the fighting had stopped, Chuck decided to take an impromptu fishing trip and take Chuck Jr., Daniel, and Andrew with him. According to Andrew, this wasn't something out of the norm for Chuck. He would often load the gear and grab 1, 2, or all of the boys, and they would head out to fish for the day. But this time, Chuck told the boys to say goodbye to Monique before they left the house, which wasn't something that he had ever done before. According to Andrew, Chuck brought the boys to the door of Monique's bedroom and opened it just a crack and blocked the boys from entering or looking in. He told the boys to say goodbye to Monique. Andrew stated in an interview that he remembers peering through the small crack in the door to say goodbye to Monique and seeing her sitting on the floor of her bedroom with her legs crossed and not moving at all. Now, his brother, Chuck Jr., has a different recollection of saying goodbye to Monique that day. Chuck Jr. stated that he remembered hugging Monique when he said goodbye and that she told him to have a good day and that she was sorry that she was sick and couldn't go with him on the fishing trip. Even though those 2 accounts differ in what the boys remember, they both corroborate the fact that Chuck told them to say goodbye to Monique. When Chuck and the boys left for the fishing trip that day, it was pouring rain, which meant that the trip was going to suck for the boys. But what was going to make the trip suck even harder was that all of the fishing poles stayed at the Daniels' home. Hey, Shitsnake Chuck, How are you going to catch a fish with no pole? According to the boys, Chuck piled them into the vehicle and they drove for about an hour. They stopped at a McDonald's, ate, then turned around and went back home. Chuck pulled into the garage and told the boys to stay in the car. He then went into the house. Now, the boys state that Chuck left them in the car for approximately an hour. But because they were 5 and 6, it probably was like 20 minutes or half an hour, and they felt like it was an hour. Unless they knew how to tell time and there was a clock in the car, but either way, they were left in the car for quite a while. Chuck finally let the boys out of the car, and Andrew ran into the house and into the bathroom to pee. Andrew states that he felt like there was someone else in the bathroom with him, someone behind the shower curtain. He said he was just about to pull the curtain back when Chuck came in and yanked him out of the bathroom. Then Chuck took the boys and put them in a bedroom and locked the door. According to the boys, Chuck told the boys that he was going out to look for Monique, and he then left the house and left them locked in the room for 2 days. When Chuck came back to the house, he pulled one of the boys out of the room and put him in the truck and left the house with him. All that he remembers about that ride with Chuck is that there was an oil barrel in the back of the truck and that they drove for a really long time. He stated that eventually Chuck pulled over and told him to stay in the truck and hopped out. Chuck then took the barrel out of the back and disappeared behind some trees with it. After a while, Chuck came back to the truck without the barrel and was covered in dirt, hopped back into the truck, and drove home. When police were finally notified of Monique's disappearance, almost 2 years after the last time she was seen, a neighbor came forward stating that he believed he had seen Monique climbing into a pickup truck with a suitcase of clothes. He states that he was outside mowing his lawn when he recalls seeing this occur. That neighbor stated that it was June 2nd when he saw Monique climb into that truck, and according to the boys and the weather report for that day, it was pouring rain. Can I just ask, who mows their lawn in a rainstorm? No one does. Unless you're the crazy guy that lives at the end of the street and doesn't talk to anybody. I think even the crazy guy at the end of the street probably wouldn't do it either. Crime Watch Daily found Chuck and Candace living in Florida after they had returned from Germany. They approached them asking them about Monique's disappearance. Both parents stated, "It's in God's hands now," and walked away from the cameras, telling Crime Watch Daily to get off their property. But Candace also added that Angelique was a messed up kid and not a reliable source. Chuck was diagnosed with colon cancer in October of 2018. He died at home in January of 2019. Fuck you, Chuck. Angelique has stated in several interviews that guilt haunts her every single day for participating in Chuck's cover-up. Let me just say this to you, Angelique. If all this is true, and I'm not saying that it is or it's not, but if it's true, and P.S., I do believe you, this is not your fault, and you have nothing to feel guilty about. You were a child. The only fault in this falls onto the adults who were supposed to love and guide you as you grew up, not coerce you into covering up the disappearance of your own sister. Secrets are only ever a good thing if it has something to do with the present. Other than that, secrets are bad. Angelique states that she is convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that Chuck murdered Monique and that she will never stop looking for her sister. She also wants people to know that Monique was a person and she did exist and she needs to be brought home. To this day, there has been no trace of Monique Daniels. My thoughts. I believe in coincidences just as much as the next guy. I mean, they happen all the time. But there are way too many coincidences that occur in this case that are just a little too convenient to me. Monique only contacting the family after 6 months of being gone and 2 days after her aunt starts asking about her whereabouts and police reports? No, I don't think so. The level of coercion that Chuck used on Angelique makes me want to puke on him and punch him in his fat face. Telling a child that their mother is suicidal is just disgusting and abusive. And then to tell her that if she tells anyone that she wrote the letters and made the phone call, she would go to jail. And remember, Angelique is younger than Monique. So, she's 11 at this point. Can you imagine how terrified that poor little girl was? She shouldn't have had to carry that weight on her shoulders. Chuck, sir, you are a shit rat. I know he's dead, but he's still a shit rat, even in death. The burglary. Oh my God. The burglary? I'm putting that in air quotes, even though you can't see me. The day before those letters were to be handed over to the police for analysis? Sure. Why would someone break into a home to steal tunage and ghetto blasters, rifle through the entire house, and only take 2 letters? What about the TV or the rest of the valuables inside the house? What the fuck would a thief want with 2 letters written by a 16-year-old to her family? No, I don't think so. As to the neighbor that came forward 2 years after Monique went missing, here's the thing. Eyewitnesses are not reliable at the best of times. If you go into a group in a room and you have somebody walk out without telling the rest of them that they're leaving, and then ask those who remain what that person was wearing, you are going to get 49 different answers. I think the eyewitness probably saw Monique getting into a truck with a bag at some point, maybe, and confused it with June 2nd. I like to think that there are some nice people out in the world and that this neighbor was trying to help. In regard to the differing stories of the boys as they were heading out for the fishing trip, these boys were really young, 5 and 7, in that age range. And sometimes the mind can alter or change memories from that long ago. Christ, ask me what I had for dinner yesterday and I couldn't tell you. I can't even remember if I put a tea bag in my cup while I'm waiting for the kettle to boil, let alone ask me something that happened 20 years ago. There's an interesting documentary on 9/11. It's called Voices from the Towers, and it discusses different phone calls that came from the victims out of the towers to their loved ones. And there's this one mother who talks about the phone call from her son, Stephen. And Stephen didn't get a hold of his mom that day, unfortunately, but he did leave a message. And she says in the documentary that as the time passes, she alters what the message that Stephen left her said. It doesn't just say the exact words. In her mind, it doesn't say, Mom, there was a plane that hit the building. I'm fine. I'll call you when I'm safe. Love you. In her mind, over the years, she has changed the message so that Stephen says, I'm going to be okay, and so are you. I love you. So she's altered her memory of this message from her son to help comfort her. And I wonder if something along the same lines has happened to the boy's recollection of saying goodbye to Monique that day. I don't think that either of the boys are maliciously relaying lies about their memory from that day. I think that that might be what each of them honestly remembers. And one or both of them has altered their memory because of trauma. These kids were abused horribly by these two shit snakes for years. In the first letter that Monique sent, it states that she and her new husband have a daughter named Chelsea. But at the point of the first letter, Monique's only been gone for 6 months. That seems pretty fast for a lot of giant life points to happen. To me, anyways. I call them life points, like getting married is a life point, having a kid is a life point, moving to a new place, burying a parent, things like that. I mean, it's not impossible to have a baby in 6 months, but it just seems like a very tight timeline for all those huge events to happen. Run away, get married, move to Alaska, travel the US. But that could just be me thinking that's a lot to do in 6 months. Honestly, I believe Angelique. Chuck and Candace, they admitted to the abuse, and Chuck admitted to forcing Angelique to fake the call and write the letters. So no matter what Chuck and Candace say or said up until Chuck's death, I would never believe a word that came out of their mouth, unless it was, we killed Monique and buried her here. Other than that, they are just spewing lies every time they open their big, fat, stupid mouths. I really hate these two parents. Like, I don't even want to call them parents because they're not. They are not parents. To me, I see the possibility of 3 scenarios as to what has happened to Monique. The first, Monique did in fact run away and start her life and cut all ties to her family. I don't believe it for 1 second. Monique protected her younger siblings when the abuse was happening in the home, and there is no way that I think that that girl would have left her siblings inside that house ever. Number 2, Chuck and Candace had had enough of Monique acting out, being rebellious, getting pregnant, basically defying their rules and their lifestyle. And she was about to turn 16, so they wouldn't be able to abuse her for much longer. So they murdered her, and Chuck disposed of her body somewhere off the side of a road in an oil barrel. And the third, Chuck was sexually abusing Monique, and she ended up getting pregnant again, and Chuck needed to get rid of that evidence quickly. And Candace was either complacent or participated in that murder scheme and disposal of Monique's body. And I 100% believe that Chuck and Candace were some of the most horrific devil parents that abused their children for their entire lives. I know those last 2 scenarios are dark, but this is a true crime podcast, so what did you expect? Those 3 scenarios are what I see as plausible, and I lean towards the third one most of all. I wish nothing but the best for Angelique and all her siblings, even though, according to some of the Reddit posts I read, there's been some rifts that have continued. Candace apparently is still alive and causing shit. So I hope that someday this family of 6 children, not Candace, but the kids, can get together and form their own family and help each other heal. And with that, I think we'll leave it there for this week. Stay safe, get your pap test done, and enjoy your day today. This has been a Bitter Witness production.